March 15th, 2024. Officer Derek Paulson shoved a black man out of Miller's diner, screaming that people like him didn't belong in a place meant for real Americans. What this racist cop didn't know was that the quiet customer he just humiliated had survived 3 tours in Fallujah and held the Navy Cross for valor. Would you believe what happened when this decorated Marine finally revealed who he really was? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun barely crested over the Georgia pines when Officer Derek Paulson's patrol car rolled into the gravel parking lot of Miller's diner. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the screen door, mixing with the humid southern air that clung to everything like a wet blanket. Inside, Marcus Thompson sat alone in a corner booth, his broad shoulders hunched over a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. He wore a faded grey hoodie and jeans. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. Just a man trying to enjoy a quiet meal before the world demanded anything of him. He didn't notice Officer Paulson enter. Didn't see the way the cop's eyes narrowed when they landed on him. Didn't catch the barely perceptible sneer that twisted Paulson's thin lips as he surveyed the diner's other patrons. All white, all local, all people he recognized, all except one. "Hey," Paulson's voice cut through the low murmur of breakfast conversation like a knife. "You in the corner?" Marcus looked up slowly, his dark eyes meeting Paulson's pale blue ones across the diner. The room went silent. Forks stopped moving. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Even Betty Carson, the 72-year-old waitress who'd worked at Miller's for 4 decades, froze mid-pour. "Me?" Marcus's voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that came from years of training. "Yeah, you." Paulson's hand rested on his belt, inches from his service weapon. "What are you doing here?" Marcus blinked once, twice. "Eating breakfast, sir." The word "sir" seemed to irritate Paulson rather than appease him. His jaw clenched. "This ain't that kind of place. You need to move along. I'm sorry." Marcus set down his fork carefully, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I don't understand. I ordered food. I'm eating it. Is there a problem?" Paulson took 3 heavy steps toward Marcus's booth, his boots echoing on the checkered linoleum floor. "The problem is, you don't belong here. Miller's is a family establishment. We serve our community. Real Americans who work hard and respect tradition." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus's hands remained visible on the table, flat against the worn Formica surface. "I am an American officer, and I'm just trying to eat my breakfast in peace." "Don't give me that." Paulson's voice rose, drawing stares from the handful of other diners. "I know your type. Wandering into places you got no business being, looking to start trouble, looking to play the victim." "Well, not in my town." Betty Carson finally found her voice. "Derek, maybe we should stay out of this, Betty." Paulson's hand shot up, silencing her without even looking in her direction. His eyes never left Marcus. "This doesn't concern you." Marcus took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling with practiced control. Anyone watching closely would have noticed the discipline in that breath, the way he centered himself before speaking. But Paulson wasn't watching closely. Paulson was only seeing what he wanted to see. Officer Paulson. Marcus read the nameplate on the uniform. "I haven't broken any laws. I came in, I ordered food, I sat down. That's it. I'm not causing any trouble. You're causing trouble just by being here." Paulson was close now, looming over the booth. "This is a respectable establishment in a respectable town. We don't need outsiders coming in here thinking they can just, I have money to pay." Marcus's voice remained steady. "I'm bothering no one. What exactly is the issue?" Paulson's face flushed red. "The issue is, I'm telling you to leave. You can either walk out on your own, or I can help you out. Your choice." In the corner booth by the window, an elderly man named Harold Becker shifted uncomfortably. He'd known Derek Paulson since he was a boy, had watched him grow up in Millbrook County. This wasn't the first time he'd seen Derek act this way, but it never got easier to witness. "Derek," Harold ventured quietly, "the man's just eating." Maybe, Mr. Becker, with all due respect, this is police business. Paulson's tone left no room for argument. I'm handling a potential disturbance. There is no disturbance. Marcus's hands remained flat on the table, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're creating one. That was the wrong thing to say. Paulson's hand shot out, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his hoodie and yanking him to his feet with surprising force. You talking back to me now? That's insubordination. That's resisting a lawful order. I haven't resisted anything. Marcus didn't fight back, didn't pull away. He stood there, a full 3 inches taller than Paulson, but somehow making himself smaller, non-threatening. You haven't given me a lawful order. You've just told me to leave a public restaurant where I'm a paying customer. This ain't about the law, boy. Paulson's grip tightened on Marcus's collar, twisting the fabric. This is about respect. This is about knowing your place. You come wandering into Miller's like you own it, like you got some kind of right to be here, sitting in our booths, eating our food. Our food. Marcus's voice finally showed a crack of emotion. I paid for this food with my money that I earned. Paulson shoved him backward. Marcus's hip hit the edge of the table, sending his coffee cup clattering to the floor, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. Brown liquid spread across the checkered floor like blood. You think I care where you got your money? Paulson was shouting now, his face inches from Marcus's. You could be a drug dealer, a gang member, another thug coming into my county thinking you can just do whatever you want. Well, I got news for you. Officer Paulson. Betty Carson's voice shook but held firm. I served him. He was polite. He ordered the number 3 breakfast special, said please and thank you. He's done nothing wrong. Paulson whirled on her. Betty, you don't get to decide who belongs in this diner and who doesn't. That's my job. I protect this community from people who don't respect our way of life. Your way of life? Marcus's voice was quiet again, but there was steel underneath now. What exactly is your way of life, Officer Paulson? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like bullying someone for the color of their skin. The diner went absolutely silent. Even the kitchen sound stopped. Through the serving window, cook Tommy Brennan stood frozen, spatula in hand, watching the scene unfold with growing horror. Paulson's face went from red to purple. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. His hand moved to his handcuffs. You're under arrest for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and assaulting a police officer. I haven't touched you. Marcus's voice remained controlled despite everything. Everyone here can testify to that. You threatened me with your aggressive posture and hostile language. Paulson pulled out his handcuffs, metal glinting in the morning light streaming through the window. You made me fear for my safety. That's assault in the eyes of the law. Harold Becker stood up from his booth. Now, Derek, that's not what happened, and you know it. Sit down, Mr. Becker. Paulson's shout made the old man flinch. Unless you want to be charged with interfering with a police investigation, Marcus slowly turned around, placing his hands behind his back without being asked. His face showed no emotion now, just a blank acceptance that made Betty Carson's heart break. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone who knew that fighting would only make things worse. You're doing the right thing, Paulson said as he clamped the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists, tightening them more than necessary. Should have done it 10 minutes ago when I first told you to leave. As Paulson walked Marcus toward the door, his hand tight on the back of Marcus's neck, he called out to the diner. Let this be a lesson, folks. This is what happens when people forget their place. When they think they can just waltz into our spaces, our community, without consequences. The door swung shut behind them with a final condemning bang. What none of them knew, not Officer Derek Paulson, not Betty Carson, not Harold Becker, or Tommy Brennan, was that the quiet man in handcuffs had already survived 3 tours in Fallujah, that he'd pulled wounded Marines from burning vehicles while under heavy fire, that the Navy Cross sitting in a box in his apartment was one of the highest military decorations for valor in combat. that the man Officer Paulson just arrested for, not knowing his place, had spent the last 8 years fighting for every single person in that diner to have the freedom to eat breakfast in peace. But they would learn, they would all learn, because Marcus Thompson wasn't just any Marine. He was about to become Officer Derek Paulson's worst nightmare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Station sat on the corner of Main Street and Jefferson Avenue, a squat brick building that had watched over the town since 1967. Officer Derek Paulson's patrol car pulled into the back lot, tires crunching over loose gravel. In the back seat, Marcus Thompson sat perfectly still, his cuffed hands resting in his lap. He'd been silent for the entire 15-minute drive, his eyes focused on something distant, something the officer couldn't see. Paulson glanced in the rearview mirror, a satisfied smirk playing at his lips. "Not so tough now, are you? No more smart remarks about my way of life?" Marcus didn't respond. His breathing remained steady, controlled. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same breathing technique that had kept him alive during firefights in Ramadi. That's what I thought. Paulson killed the engine and climbed out, opening the back door with more force than necessary. "Come on, let's get you processed." The station's processing room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Deputy Travis Holbrook looked up from his computer as Paulson marched Marcus through the door, one hand still gripping the back of his neck. "What have we got here, Derek?" Holbrook was younger, maybe 26, with a buzz cut and a wedding ring that still looked new. "Trespasser. Disturbing the peace. Assaulted an officer." Paulson rattled off the charges with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. "Found him at Miller's diner causing problems." Holbrook's eyebrows rose. "Miller's? What kind of problems?" "The usual kind." Paulson pushed Marcus toward the processing desk. "Refused to leave when asked. Got aggressive when I tried to enforce order. You know how it goes," Marcus finally spoke. "That's not what happened." "Shut your mouth." Paulson's hand tightened on Marcus's shoulder. "You'll get your chance to talk when I say you can talk." Holbrook shifted uncomfortably. Something about this didn't sit right, but Derek Paulson had 12 years on the force. He was a senior officer, a training supervisor, someone who knew the job. Who was Holbrook to question him? "Let's get him printed and photographed," Paulson said, pulling Marcus's wallet from his pocket. He flipped it open, pulling out a Georgia driver's license. Marcus Thompson, age 34. Address is... He paused, reading. "Apartment 4B, 2150 Riverside Drive." "That's the complex near the VA hospital," Holbrook observed. "VA." Paulson's eyes narrowed. "You military?" Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Yes. What branch?" "Marines," Paulson snorted. "Let me guess. You did a couple years, got yourself a dishonorable discharge. Now you're living off taxpayer money and playing the victim card every chance you get." The muscles in Marcus's jaw twitched. But he said nothing. "Thought so." Paulson tossed the wallet onto the desk. "They're all the same, Travis. Come back from wherever thinking the world owes them something. Can't hold down a real job. Can't follow simple instructions from law enforcement. Officer Paulson." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. "I served honorably. I'm not playing any cards. I was eating breakfast. That's all. You were trespassing on private property after being asked to leave by a law enforcement officer." Paulson grabbed Marcus's arm, forcing his fingerprints onto the ink pad. "That's a crime, soldier boy. Doesn't matter what you think you did overseas. The processing took 20 minutes. Fingerprints, photographs, personal effects inventory, one wallet containing $43, one cell phone, one set of car keys, one watch." Marcus surrendered them all without protest, watching as Holbrook carefully logged each item. "Any weapons?" Holbrook asked, following protocol. "Search him," Paulson ordered. Holbrook conducted a pat-down, professional and thorough. "Nothing, sir." "Of course not. They're always clean when we catch them." Paulson filled out paperwork, his pen scratching across carbon forms. "Too smart to carry anything that would add real charges. But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Sheriff Raymond Cunningham emerged from his office, a coffee mug in one hand and a curious expression on his weathered face. He was 58, grey-haired, and had been sheriff of Millbrook County for 16 years. "What's the situation, Derek?" Paulson straightened, adopting a more formal posture. "Sir, responded to a disturbance at Miller's Diner approximately 0900 hours. Subject was trespassing and refused to comply with lawful orders to vacate the premises." Cunningham's eyes moved from Paulson to Marcus, taking in the scene. "Miller's doesn't usually have trespassing problems." "No, sir, but this individual was creating an uncomfortable environment for the establishment's regular customers. When I attempted to de-escalate the situation, he became verbally aggressive and physically threatening." "That's a lie." Marcus spoke calmly, his military bearing evident even in handcuffs. "Sheriff, I was sitting quietly eating breakfast when Officer Paulson approached me and demanded I leave. I asked why. He told me I didn't belong there. When I attempted to explain I was a paying customer, he grabbed me, threw me against the table, and arrested me." Cunningham's expression remained neutral. "Were there witnesses?" "Yes, sir," Paulson answered quickly. "Betty Carson, the waitress, can confirm the subject's aggressive behavior. Harold Becker was present as well. Both will testify that I acted appropriately in response to a threatening situation." "Sheriff, that's not," Marcus started. "You'll have your opportunity to tell your side," Cunningham interrupted, though not unkindly. "Right now we're following procedure. Derek, what charges are we filing?" Paulson consulted his notes. "Criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, and assault on a peace officer. I'm also recommending a psychiatric evaluation based on the subject's erratic behavior and apparent inability to follow simple instructions." Marcus's hands clenched into fists behind his back, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not crazy. I'm a United States Marine who was eating breakfast." "Former Marine," Paulson corrected with a sneer. "And being in the military doesn't give you the right to act however you want in civilian society. You're not special. You're not above the law." Sheriff Cunningham studied Marcus for a long moment. There was something about the man's bearing, the way he held himself despite the circumstances, that suggested a different story than what Paulson was telling. But Derek Paulson was one of his most experienced officers. He'd never given Cunningham reason to doubt his word before. "Put him in holding cell 2, Cunningham finally said. "Derek, I want your full report on my desk within the hour. Include statements from the witnesses at Miller's." "Yes, sir." Paulson grabbed Marcus's arm. "Come on." As they walked down the hallway toward the holding cells, Paulson leaned in close, his voice low enough that only Marcus could hear. "You think you're tough? You think that uniform you wore means something here? Let me tell you something, boy. In this county, I'm the law. I'm the one who decides who belongs and who doesn't, and people like you don't belong." Marcus said nothing, but his eyes tracked every detail of the hallway, every door, every window. Old habits from combat zones: always know your exits, always map your terrain, always prepare for the unexpected. The holding cell was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a metal bench bolted to the concrete wall and a toilet in the corner. Paulson removed the handcuffs and shoved Marcus inside, the barred door clanging shut with a sound of brutal finality. "Get comfortable," Paulson said, his smile cruel. "You're going to be here a while. Long enough to learn some respect. Long enough to understand that there are consequences for people who don't know their place in the world." He walked away, his boots echoing on the concrete floor, leaving Marcus alone in the cell. Marcus sat down on the metal bench, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. The position was familiar. He'd sat exactly like this countless times during his military career, waiting for orders, waiting for the fight to begin, waiting for the moment when patience would transform into action. Officer Derek Paulson thought he'd won, thought he'd taught another lesson, thought he'd put another uppity outsider in his place. He had no idea that the man sitting calmly in holding cell 2 had survived ambushes, IED blasts, and firefights that would have broken most people, had led men through the worst combat zones in modern military history, had been personally decorated by a Marine Corps general. For valor under fire, Derek Paulson thought. He was in control of this situation. He couldn't have been more wrong, because Marcus Thompson wasn't just waiting, he was preparing, and when the truth finally came out, it would destroy everything Derek Paulson had built. 2 hours after Marcus Thompson was locked in, holding cell 2, Officer Derek Paulson sat in the station's interview room with Betty Carson and Harold Becker. A digital recorder sat between them on the scarred wooden table, its red light blinking steadily. "Let's go over this one more time," Paulson said, his notepad open in front of him. "I need your statements to be clear and consistent for the report." Betty Carson twisted her hands in her lap. At 72, she'd seen enough of life to know when something wasn't right, but she'd also learned that sometimes keeping quiet was safer than speaking up. Still, her conscience gnawed at her. "Derek, I'm not sure I can say what you want me to say," she began carefully. Paulson's smile never reached his eyes. "Betty, I'm not asking you to say anything except the truth. You were there. You saw what happened. Just tell me what you observed." "What I observed," Betty said slowly, "was a polite young man eating breakfast. He said please when he ordered. Thanked me when I brought his food. Didn't cause any fuss at all until you—" "Until what?" Paulson leaned forward slightly. "Until I responded to a potential security threat. Betty, you've worked at Miller's for what, 40 years? You know the kind of people who come through there. You know our regulars, our community members. This guy was an outsider. Didn't you feel uncomfortable when he walked in?" Betty hesitated. The truth was, she had noticed Marcus, had wondered briefly who he was, where he'd come from. But uncomfortable. No, he'd been quiet, respectful, minding his own business. "I noticed him," she said carefully. "But I wasn't uncomfortable. Think about it, Betty." Paulson's voice took on a persuasive tone. "A stranger walks into Miller's, sits in the corner, hood up, watching everyone. Didn't that seem suspicious to you? Didn't you wonder what he was really doing there?" "His hood wasn't up when I served him," Betty corrected. "And he wasn't watching anyone. He was looking at his phone." Paulson made a note. "So he was on his phone. Could have been coordinating with associates, planning something." "You don't know?" "Planning what?" "Derek, he ordered the number 3 breakfast special." "Betty." Paulson set down his pen and looked at her with an expression that mixed patience and frustration. "I know you want to see the best in people. That's what makes you a good person. But I deal with criminals every day. I'm trained to spot threats that normal citizens might miss. When I approached this individual and asked him to leave, he immediately became hostile." Harold Becker, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Now, Derek, I was sitting right there. I didn't hear him say anything hostile." Paulson turned to the elderly man. "Mr. Becker, with all due respect, your hearing isn't what it used to be." The subject made several threatening statements under his breath before raising his voice. "My hearing's just fine," Harold said, an edge creeping into his voice. "And what I heard was you telling that man he didn't belong at Miller's. Didn't say nothing about security or threats. You said people like him didn't belong there." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Mr. Becker," Paulson said carefully, "are you suggesting I acted inappropriately?" "I'm suggesting you tell the truth about what happened." Harold's weathered hands gripped the arms of his chair. "That young man didn't do nothing wrong, and you know it." Paulson stood up, walking to the small window that overlooked the parking lot. When he turned back, his expression had hardened. "Let me explain something to both of you. When I write my report, it goes to the district attorney. The DE decides whether to prosecute based on my observations and your witness statements. If there are inconsistencies, if witnesses contradict the arresting officer, it creates problems. It makes our whole department look bad." "Maybe it should," Harold muttered. "What was that?" "I said maybe it should look bad when an officer arrests someone for eating breakfast while black." The words hung in the air, like smoke from a gun. Paulson's jaw clenched. "That's not what happened, and you damn well know it. This has nothing to do with race. This is about a suspicious individual who refused to cooperate with a lawful police inquiry." "Lawful?" Betty found her voice again. "Derek, you grabbed that man and threw him against a table. His coffee went everywhere. I had to clean it up. There wasn't nothing lawful about that. He was resisting. He was sitting still." Betty's voice rose, surprising even herself. He had his hands on the table the whole time. Never raised them, never made a fist, never did nothing but try to talk to you, calm and respectful. Paulson walked back to the table and sat down heavily. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, harder, more threatening. Betty, Harold, let me be very clear about something. This man is going to be charged with multiple crimes. If you give statements that contradict my report, you'll be called to testify in court. You'll be cross-examined by defense attorneys who'll try to make you look confused or biased. They'll dig into your backgrounds, your histories, looking for anything to discredit you. He paused, letting that sink in. On the other hand, if your statements support what I observed, which is the truth of what happened, this case will probably be resolved quickly. The subject will plead guilty to a lesser charge, do some community service, and we all move on with our lives. Or, Harold said quietly, an innocent man goes to jail because we lied for you. An innocent man. Paulson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Becker, I ran this guy's record while you were on your way here. Marcus Thompson. Multiple addresses in the past 5 years. No steady employment. Living in a VA apartment complex. You know what kind of people live in those places? Drug addicts. People with PTSD who can't function in normal society. Violent offenders who couldn't hack it in the military. You don't know that, Betty protested. I know enough. Paulson tapped his notepad. I know he walked into Miller's looking for trouble. I know he refused to leave when asked by a police officer. I know he became aggressive and threatening when I attempted to enforce public order. And I know that without witness statements backing up my observations, he's going to walk free and do the same thing to someone else. The interview room door opened, and Deputy Holbrook stuck his head in. Derek, Sheriff wants to see you. Tell him I'm conducting witness interviews, he said now. Paulson stood, frustration evident in every movement. We're not done here. Think very carefully about what you're going to put in your statements. Think about whether you want to help maintain law and order in this county, or whether you want to enable criminals who think they can do whatever they want. He left, closing the door harder than necessary. Betty and Harold sat in silence for a long moment. What are we going to do? Betty finally whispered. Harold looked at his age-spotted hands. I don't know. But I have been living in this county for 73 years, and I never thought I'd see the day when telling the truth would feel this dangerous. Down the hall. In Sheriff Cunningham's office, Paulson faced his superior with confidence. He'd filed his official report, detailing Thompson's aggressive behavior, his refusal to comply, his threatening posture and language. The witnesses are being difficult, Paulson admitted. They're confused about what they saw. Probably intimidated by the subject before I arrived, Cunningham read through the report, his expression unreadable. This is pretty serious, Derek. Assault on a peace officer is a felony. Yes, sir, but necessary to pursue. We can't let people think they can threaten law enforcement without consequences. And you're certain about the facts here? Certain he was the aggressor? Paulson met his eyes without hesitation. Absolutely certain, sir. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know a threat when I see one. What neither of them knew was that at that exact moment in holding cell 2, Marcus Thompson sat with his eyes closed, mentally composing a list of phone numbers he would call. A list of people who knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. A list that would turn Derek Paulson's world upside down. The lies were piling up, built on a foundation of assumptions and prejudice. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, always eventually crumble. And this one was about to come crashing down. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Marcus Thompson was finally allowed his phone call. Deputy Holbrook escorted him from the holding cell to a small room with a single desk and a landline telephone that looked like it had been installed sometime in the 1990s. You get 5 minutes, Holbrook said, though his tone was less harsh than Paulson's had been. Local calls only. Marcus picked up the receiver, his fingers moving across the numbers with practiced precision. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Colonel Patricia Hendricks. Ma'am, this is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thompson. There was a brief pause. Thompson, What's wrong? You sound like you're calling from a payphone in 1985. I'm calling from the Millbrook County Sheriff's Station, ma'am. I've been arrested. Another pause, longer this time. When Colonel Hendricks spoke again, her voice had shifted from casual to razor-sharp attention. Explain. Marcus laid out the facts in the concise, clear manner he'd learned over 8 years of military briefings. The diner, the confrontation, the arrest, the charges. He kept emotion out of it, sticking to observable facts and direct quotes. And the arresting officer's name? Hendricks asked. Derek Paulson. 12 years with Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. Stand by, Gunny. The line went silent, but Marcus could hear rapid typing in the background. Hendricks was already working. I'm looking at your service record now. 3 combat tours. Navy Cross, 2 Purple Hearts. Bronze Star with Valor Device. You're currently on terminal leave, pending your transition to civilian life, correct? Yes, ma'am. Separation date is April 15th, which means you're still active duty. Hendricks's voice took on a dangerous edge. Which means this local police department just arrested a United States Marine on active duty status. Do they know this? No, ma'am. I tried to explain I was military, but Officer Paulson assumed I was dishonorably discharged. Of course he did. The typing continued. I'm putting in calls to JAG, to the Regional Marine Corps Liaison, and to the base commander at Camp Lejeune. You sit tight, Gunny. This is about to get very interesting for Officer Paulson. Ma'am, I don't want special treatment. I just want... Thompson, you're not asking for special treatment. You're a decorated combat veteran who was assaulted and falsely arrested while eating breakfast. The Marine Corps takes care of its own. Clear? Clear, ma'am. Good. Expect visitors within the hour. The line went dead. Holbrook, who had been standing by the door, looked at Marcus with new curiosity. You really military? Yes. What rank? Gunnery sergeant. Holbrook's eyebrows rose. That's pretty high, isn't it? It's a senior enlisted rank. And you got medals? I heard you mention medals. Marcus met his eyes. I have some commendations, yes. Before Holbrook could ask more questions, the station's front door burst open. A woman in her mid-50s strode in, her grey blazer and crisp white shirt, giving her the appearance of someone who meant business. She carried a leather briefcase and an expression that could cut steel. I'm here to see Marcus Thompson, she announced to the front desk officer. And you are? The desk officer, a man named Riley, looked up from his crossword puzzle. Attorney Jennifer Walsh. I represent Mr. Thompson. Riley blinked. He didn't call a lawyer. He called some military person. The military person called me. Walsh set her briefcase on the counter. Now I need to see my client immediately. I assume he hasn't been questioned without legal representation present? I don't think. You don't think? Walsh's voice could have frozen water. Let me be very clear. If my client has been interrogated without an attorney present, without being read his Miranda rights, and without proper legal counsel, every single thing said in that interrogation will be inadmissible in court. Furthermore, I will file a civil rights lawsuit against this department that will cost taxpayers more money than this building is worth. Sheriff Cunningham emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. I'm Sheriff Cunningham. Can I help you? Walsh extended a business card. Jennifer Walsh, attorney at law. I'm here to represent Marcus Thompson. I need to see him now. Cunningham examined the card. Miss Walsh, your client hasn't requested an attorney. My client is a decorated United States Marine on active duty who was unlawfully arrested while eating breakfast. He didn't request an attorney because he was probably too busy being assaulted by one of your officers. Walsh's eyes were steel. Now, are you going to let me see my client, or do I need to start making phone calls to the Georgia Bar Association and the ACLU? 10 minutes later, Walsh sat across from Marcus in the same interview room, where Paulson had pressured Betty and Harold. She'd already filled 3 pages of her legal pad with notes. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson, she said, using his proper rank, I need you to understand something. What happened to you this morning wasn't just wrong. It was illegal on multiple levels. We're talking civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, assault under color of authority. and potentially federal crimes. Ma'am, I just want to clear this up and move on with my life. Walsh leaned forward. I understand that impulse, but here's what you need to consider. How many other people has Officer Paulson done this to? How many people who didn't have a colonel making phone calls on their behalf? How many people who couldn't afford an attorney or didn't know their rights? Marcus was silent, considering. The Marine Corps is already mobilizing, Walsh continued. I spoke with Colonel Hendricks on my way here. There's a JAG officer driving down from Camp Lejeune as we speak. The Marine Corps Times is going to run a story. This is going to become very public very quickly. I didn't want publicity. I know. But sometimes the right thing isn't the comfortable thing. Walsh flipped through her notes. Officer Paulson has 47 formal complaints in his file. 47, Sergeant Thompson. Most were dismissed as unsubstantiated. Want to guess what the demographics of those complainants look like? Marcus closed his eyes. He'd seen this pattern before in different contexts, different countries. Power without accountability. Authority without oversight. What do you need from me? He asked quietly. Right now, I need you to write down everything that happened this morning. Every word Paulson said. Every action he took. Every witness who was present. Walsh slid a legal pad across the table. And I need you to authorize me to request the diner's security footage before it mysteriously disappears. Miller's has security cameras. Every business in Georgia with a liquor license is required to have them. Didn't you notice the camera above the register? Marcus thought back. In his years of combat, he'd been trained to notice everything. Exits, threats, tactical positions. But this morning, he'd just been a man trying to eat breakfast. He'd let his guard down. I didn't notice, he admitted. That's okay, because I guarantee Derek Paulson didn't notice either. While Walsh and Marcus worked in the interview room, Sheriff Cunningham sat in his office reviewing Paulson's arrest report for the third time. Something about it bothered him, like a splinter he couldn't quite locate. The language was too perfect, too practiced. Phrases like aggressive posture and threatening behavior and refused lawful commands. They appeared in almost every arrest report Paulson filed. Same words, same structure, just different names and dates. Cunningham pulled up Paulson's personnel file on his computer and started cross-referencing arrest reports with complaint records. A pattern emerged that made his stomach turn. His desk phone rang. Sheriff Cunningham, this is Major Ronald Foster, Staff Judge Advocate at Camp Lejeune. I'm calling regarding the arrest of Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thompson. Cunningham's hand tightened on the receiver. Major Foster, what can I do for you? You can start by explaining why one of my Marines was assaulted and arrested while on terminal leave. You can explain why he was denied his right to contact his command. And you can explain why your officer assumed a decorated combat veteran was dishonorably discharged based on nothing but the color of his skin. Major, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Sheriff. There's been a civil rights violation. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it. Foster's voice was ice. Expect official notification from the Marine Corps within the hour. We'll be conducting our own investigation. And the sheriff? You might want to have a very serious conversation with Officer Paulson before this gets any worse. The line went dead. Cunningham sat back in his chair, staring at the phone. In 16 years as sheriff, he'd dealt with plenty of difficult situations. But this was different. This was the moment he realized his department had a problem much bigger than one bad arrest, and it was about to explode in all their faces. Down the hall, Derek Paulson sat at his desk, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him. He was writing up supplemental reports, adding details that would make Thompson look worse, make himself look better. He had no idea that security footage from Miller's diner was already being downloaded by Walsh's investigator. He had no idea that Marine Corps JAG was mobilizing. He had no idea that the quiet man in the holding cell had friends in very high places. Derek Paulson thought he'd arrested just another troublemaker. He'd actually set in motion his own complete destruction, and the reckoning was coming faster than he could possibly imagine. At 5:15 in the evening, The Millbrook County Sheriff's Station lobby filled with people Derek Paulson had never expected to see. Major Ronald Foster arrived first, his Marine Corps dress uniform immaculate, the gold oak leaves on his shoulders catching the fluorescent lights. Behind him came Captain Lisa Moreno from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, carrying a briefcase that contained enough legal ammunition to level a small city. Then came the media. WGTV News Channel 7 sent their investigative reporter, Sarah Chen, who'd won 2 regional Emmys for exposing police corruption. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution dispatched Marcus Rivera, a journalist known for his unflinching coverage of civil rights violations. Even the Marine Corps Times had sent a correspondent. Sheriff Cunningham stood in his office doorway, watching the circus unfold with growing dread. "Sheriff Cunningham?" Major Foster extended his hand, though the gesture felt more like a formality than a greeting. "I believe we spoke on the phone, Major Foster." Cunningham shook his hand. "This seems like quite a response for a simple arrest." "Simple?" Foster's eyebrows rose. "Sheriff, there's nothing simple about what happened here today." "Where is Gunnery Sergeant Thompson?" "He's in holding cell 2, speaking with his attorney. I need to see him immediately. And I need to see the arresting officer's report, the booking documents, and any witness statements you've collected." Cunningham hesitated. "Major, with all due respect, this is a local law enforcement matter. The military doesn't have jurisdiction." "Actually," Captain Moreno interrupted, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick document, "we do. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson is currently on terminal leave, which means he remains on active duty status until his official separation date of April 15th. Any crime committed against him while on active duty falls under military jurisdiction per the Uniform Code of Military Justice." She handed Cunningham the document. "This is a formal notification that the Marine Corps is asserting jurisdiction over this matter. You can either cooperate fully, or we can escalate this to federal authorities. Your choice." Before Cunningham could respond, the front door opened again. This time, a tall black woman in her 60s entered, moving with the same quiet authority that Marcus Thompson possessed. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself like someone accustomed to command. "I'm looking for my son," she said to the desk officer. Marcus Thompson, Deputy Holbrook, who'd been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you Mrs. Thompson?" "Dr. Thompson," she corrected gently. "Dr. Evelyn Thompson. I'm a retired Army colonel and Marcus's mother. Now where is my son?" The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Sheriff Cunningham felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just any Marine. This was the son of a retired colonel. This was someone with connections, with family, who understood how the system worked. "Dr. Thompson," Cunningham said, stepping forward. "I'm Sheriff Cunningham. Your son is safe and unharmed. He's currently meeting with his attorney." "Unharmed?" Dr. Thompson's voice could have cut glass. "Sheriff, I've already spoken with witnesses who saw your officer assault my son. So let's not pretend he's unharmed. Let's instead talk about how you're going to fix this catastrophic mistake." In the interview room, Marcus looked up as the door opened. His expression transformed when he saw his mother, followed by Major Foster in full uniform. "Mom." He stood, and for the first time that day, his composure cracked slightly. "I told you not to come. I said I'd handle this. Marcus Jeremiah Thompson, you are my son." Dr. Thompson crossed the room and embraced him fiercely. "Did you really think I wouldn't come?" Major Foster waited until mother and son separated before speaking. "Gunny, I need you to walk me through everything that happened. Leave nothing out." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus recounted the entire incident, while Attorney Walsh took notes, and Major Foster's expression grew progressively darker. When Marcus finished, Foster turned to Captain Moreno. "Get the security footage from the diner. I want it downloaded and preserved immediately. And get me the officer's personnel file. Already on it, sir." Moreno was typing rapidly on her laptop. Foster turned back to Marcus. "Gunny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you want to press this? Because if you do, we're going to press it hard. This will become public. Your name, your service record, everything. It's going to be a fight." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about Betty Carson, who'd served him breakfast with a kind smile. He thought about Harold Becker, who'd tried to speak up even when it was dangerous. He thought about all the people Derek Paulson had brutalized over the years, people who didn't have a colonel mother, or a JAG officer, or an attorney. "I want to press it," he said quietly. "Not for me. For everyone else he's done this too." "Good," Foster nodded. "Because the Marine Corps doesn't abandon its own. And Gunny, we're about to make Officer Paulson very, very sorry he picked the wrong person to mess with." 20 minutes later, Sheriff Cunningham called an emergency meeting in the station's conference room. Derek Paulson sat at the table, still confident, still unaware of how completely his world was about to collapse. Sheriff Cunningham entered, followed by Major Foster, Captain Moreno, and Attorney Walsh. Paulson's confidence wavered slightly when he saw the military uniforms. "Derek," Cunningham said, his voice heavy, "this is Major Foster and Captain Moreno from Camp Lejeune. They're here about Marcus Thompson." "I don't understand." Paulson looked between them. "What does the military have to do with this?" "Everything," Foster said, taking a seat directly across from Paulson. "Officer Paulson, do you know who you arrested this morning?" "Some troublemaker who wouldn't leave Miller's diner when I told him to." Foster opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Marcus Thompson in full-dress blues, his chest covered with ribbons and medals. The Navy Cross hung prominently at the top, followed by 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and numerous other commendations. "That troublemaker," Foster said coldly, "is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thompson, United States Marine Corps, 3 combat tours in Iraq. Recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. Bronze Star with Valor device for heroic achievement. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon." Paulson's face went pale. Foster slid another document across the table. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's official citation for the Navy Cross. Would you like me to read it?" Before Paulson could respond, Foster began reading. "For extraordinary heroism while serving as squad leader. 2nd Platoon Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines during combat operations in Fallujah, Iraq. When his platoon came under intense enemy fire from multiple fortified positions, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to direct his squad's response and evacuate wounded Marines." Foster's voice grew harder with each word. "Despite being wounded twice by enemy fire, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson refused medical evacuation and continued to lead his squad through 12 hours of sustained combat. His actions directly resulted in the successful evacuation of 15 wounded Marines and saved countless lives. His courage and selfless devotion to duty reflected great credit upon himself and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service." The conference room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "This morning," Foster continued, "you assaulted this man. You called him a troublemaker. You assumed he was dishonorably discharged. You arrested him for eating breakfast." Foster leaned forward. "Officer Paulson, do you have any idea how many people Gunnery Sergeant Thompson has saved? How many families have their sons and daughters and husbands and wives because of his actions?" Paulson's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Captain Moreno pulled out her laptop and turned it to face Paulson. "This is security footage from Miller's diner. We obtained it 30 minutes ago. Would you like to watch it with us?" The video began playing. Crystal-clear footage showed Marcus entering the diner, ordering politely from Betty, sitting down quietly in his booth. Then Paulson appeared, approaching with aggressive body language. The audio was perfect. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Paulson's voice, filled with contempt, filled the conference room. Everyone watched as the scene unfolded exactly as Marcus had described. The unprovoked assault, the grab to the throat, the violent arrest. Filthy animals like you don't belong in places meant for real Americans. Sheriff Cunningham closed his eyes, his worst fears confirmed. When the video ended, Foster turned to Paulson. Officer Paulson, that real American you assaulted? He's more American than you'll ever be. He's bled for this country. He's sacrificed for this country. He's saved lives while you've been terrorizing innocent people. Attorney Walsh stood. Officer Paulson, on behalf of my client, I'm notifying you that we will be filing federal civil rights charges against you personally. We will be filing a lawsuit against this department for systemic discrimination. And we will be requesting a full investigation into every arrest you've made in the past 15 years. Dr. Evelyn Thompson entered the room, and Paulson looked up at her with confusion. This is Dr. Evelyn Thompson, Foster said. Retired Army Colonel, former commander of the 502nd Military Intelligence Battalion, and the mother of the man you assaulted this morning. Dr. Thompson looked at Paulson with an expression of pure contempt. Officer Paulson, I spent 30 years in the Army fighting to protect the rights of every American. I raised my son to serve with honor, dignity, and respect for all people. And this morning you assaulted him because you thought he was powerless. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. You were wrong. The door opened again, and Marcus Thompson entered, still in his civilian clothes, but somehow looking different now. Everyone in the room knew who he really was. The quiet dignity he'd maintained all day suddenly made perfect sense. Officer Paulson, Marcus said quietly, you told me this morning to know my place. You told me people like me don't belong in places meant for real Americans. He stood at attention, his military bearing unmistakable. Let me tell you about my place. My place was in Fallujah, pulling wounded Marines out of burning vehicles while taking enemy fire. My place was a standing post in the middle of the night, so Americans back home could sleep safely. I served my country with honor for 8 years. Marcus's voice never rose, but every word hit like a hammer, and my place right now, Officer Paulson, is watching as everything you've built comes crashing down around you. Derek Paulson's hands were shaking. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all of it was disintegrating before his eyes. The truth is, Marcus continued, you didn't arrest me because I was trespassing or threatening. You arrested me because you saw a black man and made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, and you abused your authority. He turned to Sheriff Cunningham. How many others, Sheriff? How many other people has Officer Paulson done this to? How many people who didn't have a colonel mother or a JAG officer or the Navy Cross? Cunningham had no answer. The revelation was complete. The quiet man in the holding cell wasn't a criminal or a troublemaker. He was a hero, and Derek Paulson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The reckoning had arrived. The conference room at Millbrook County Sheriff's Station had transformed into a courtroom of public opinion, and Derek Paulson was the defendant with no defense. Sheriff Cunningham stood at the head of the table, his face ashen as he reviewed the security footage for the second time. Each viewing made it worse. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, just raw, undeniable evidence of everything Marcus Thompson had claimed. Derek, Cunningham said quietly, I need your badge and your weapon, now. Paulson's hand instinctively went to his chest, touching the badge he'd worn for 12 years. Sheriff, you can't. I can and I am. Cunningham's voice hardened. You're suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. And Derek, you're going to want to get yourself a lawyer, a good one. Attorney Walsh opened another folder, this one considerably thicker than the others. Sheriff Cunningham, while we're discussing investigations, I think you should see this. She spread documents across the conference table like dealing cards. Each one represented a complaint filed against Derek Paulson over his 12-year career. 47 formal complaints, Walsh said, her finger tapping each document. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, 2009, alleged excessive force during a traffic stop. Mr. Jamal Washington, 2012, alleged evidence planting. Dr. Michael Johnson, 2016, alleged false arrest based on racial profiling. She pulled out a yellow highlighter and began marking specific passages. Notice a pattern, Sheriff. Every single complaint involves a person of color. Every single one describes similar behavior: aggressive confrontation, racial slurs, excessive force. And every single one was dismissed as unsubstantiated by your department. Cunningham felt sick. He'd reviewed these complaints over the years, had accepted the internal affairs findings, had trusted the system. Now that system was revealed as fundamentally broken. Captain Moreno pulled up another document on her laptop. We've also obtained Officer Paulson's arrest statistics for the past 5 years. Of 547 total arrests, 476, that's 87%, involved people of color. In the county where the demographic breakdown is 58% white, 24% black, and 18% Hispanic. She turned the laptop so everyone could see the charts and graphs. Even more damning, Officer Paulson's use of force rate for arrests involving people of color is 64%, compared to 11% for arrests involving white suspects. His case dismissal rate due to constitutional violations is 41%. 41%, Sheriff. That means nearly half of Officer Paulson's arrests were so fundamentally flawed that prosecutors couldn't even take them to trial. Major Foster leaned back in his chair, his expression one of barely contained fury. Officer Paulson, do you understand what you've done? You didn't just assault a decorated Marine. You exposed a pattern of systemic racism that has been operating in this department for over a decade. It's not racism. Paulson finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. I was doing my job. I was protecting the community. From what? Dr. Thompson interrupted, her voice sharp as a scalpel. From a man eating breakfast, from a war hero who served his country with distinction, or from people whose skin color made you uncomfortable. Paulson had no answer. Walsh continued her methodical dismantling. Let's talk about financial impact, shall we? Sheriff Cunningham, are you aware that Millbrook County has paid out $2.7 million in settlements and judgments related to Officer Paulson's conduct over the past 12 years? Cunningham's head snapped up. What? $2.7 million in taxpayer money? Walsh slid another document across the table. 15 separate settlements, all sealed with non-disclosure agreements, which is why most people in this county don't know about them. The county attorney's office has been quietly paying people to go away rather than addressing the root problem. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling. I've already contacted 7 of those settlement recipients. Now that Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's case is going public, they're willing to break their NDAs and go on record about what Officer Paulson did to them. The walls were closing in on Paulson from every direction. Sheriff Cunningham walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where news vans were setting up their satellite equipment. This was going to be the biggest story Millbrook County had ever seen. There's more, Major Foster said, opening his own folder. The Marine Corps has conducted a preliminary review of Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's service record and compared it to Officer Paulson's allegations. Officer Paulson stated, and I quote, "The subject appears to be a former military member who was likely dishonorably discharged." Foster pulled out a crisp document with official Marine Corps letterhead. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's actual service record shows 8 years of exemplary service. Multiple commendations for leadership. Perfect marks on every fitness report. Recommendations for promotion from every commanding officer he's ever served under. And a discharge classification of honorable, not dishonorable. He looked directly at Paulson. You made that assumption based on nothing but prejudice. You saw a black man and assumed criminal behavior. You saw someone you thought was vulnerable and decided to abuse your power. And you did it all while wearing a badge that's supposed to represent justice. Marcus Thompson had remained silent through most of this. But now he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Officer Paulson, do you know what I was doing at Miller's Diner this morning? Paulson looked at him but said nothing. I was celebrating, Marcus continued. Tomorrow is my daughter's 8th birthday. I was going to surprise her by picking her up from school early. We were going to go to the aquarium in Atlanta, just the 2 of us. It was going to be perfect. His voice remained controlled, but emotion flickered beneath the surface. Instead, I spent the day in a holding cell. Instead of surprising my daughter, I had to call her mother and explain that Daddy couldn't pick her up because a police officer arrested him for eating breakfast. Do you have any idea what I had to tell my 8-year-old daughter? For the first time, genuine shame crossed Paulson's face. I had to explain to her that sometimes people treat others badly because of how they look. I had to explain that sometimes the police, the people we're supposed to trust, make terrible mistakes. And I had to do it in a way that wouldn't break her heart or make her afraid of the world. Marcus stood, walking around the table until he was directly in front of Paulson. You didn't just assault me, Officer Paulson. You assaulted every value I fought for, every principle I risked my life to defend. You did it casually, confidently, because you thought you could get away with it. The room was absolutely silent. How many others? Marcus asked. How many other parents had to have that conversation with their children because of you? How many people lost jobs because you arrested them on false charges? How many lives did you damage because you thought your badge gave you the right to be a bully? Paulson's head dropped into his hands. Attorney Walsh stood, gathering her documents. Sheriff Cunningham, my client will be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit under Title 42. Section 1983 will be seeking compensatory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief requiring comprehensive reform of your department's policies and training. She turned to Paulson. Officer Paulson, you'll be named as an individual defendant. Your personal assets will be at risk. Your pension, your home, your savings, all of it. Because you chose to violate the constitutional rights of a United States Marine. Captain Moreno closed her laptop. The Marine Corps will be filing its own report with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. We'll be recommending federal prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. That's a federal felony carrying up to 10 years in prison. Additionally, Major Foster added, we'll be requesting a comprehensive investigation into this department's hiring, training, and disciplinary practices. Every officer, every policy, every procedure will be examined. Sheriff Cunningham finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of failure. Derek, you need to leave. Now, clean out your locker and turn in your equipment. You're done here. Paulson stood on shaking legs, removing his badge with trembling fingers. The small piece of metal that had represented his identity, his authority, his power for 12 years, now felt like lead in his hand. He set it on the table with a soft click that sounded like thunder. As he walked toward the door, Marcus spoke one final time. Officer Paulson. Paulson turned. I want you to know something. I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. Because you had the opportunity to serve your community with honor, and you chose to serve your prejudices instead. You could have been someone who protected and defended. Instead, you became exactly what you claimed to be fighting against, a threat to public safety. Paulson left without another word, walking past the news cameras outside, past the protesters who had already begun gathering, past the career he'd just destroyed with his own actions. Inside the conference room, Sheriff Cunningham sat down heavily. What happens now? Now? Walsh smiled grimly. Now we make sure this never happens again. We reform this department from the ground up. We review every case, compensate every victim, and ensure that Derek Paulson is the last officer in Millbrook County who thinks a badge gives him the right to brutalize innocent people. Major Foster nodded. The Marine Corps will be watching, Sheriff, closely. We take care of our own, and Gunnery Sergeant Thompson is still one of ours until April 15th. We'll make sure justice is served. Dr. Thompson placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Marcus, I'm proud of you, not just for your service, but for your dignity through all of this. You could have responded with anger, with violence. Instead, you responded with the discipline and honor that makes you the man you are. Marcus looked at his mother, then at the assembled group of lawyers, military officers, and the sheriff, who was finally beginning to understand the depth of his department's failure. I just want to go home, he said quietly. I want to see my daughter. I want to tell her that justice won today, that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's hard. You can go, Cunningham said. All charges are dropped, obviously, And Mr. Thompson, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson, I'm sorry. That doesn't fix anything, I know. But I'm sorry, Marcus nodded once, then walked out of the conference room, out of the station, and into the evening air where news cameras captured the image of a decorated Marine walking free while a disgraced police officer's career burned to ashes behind him. The reckoning was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after that March morning at Miller's Diner, the landscape of Millbrook County had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. Derek Paulson sat in a federal courtroom, wearing an ill-fitting suit instead of his police uniform. The federal judge, a stern woman named Judith Ramirez, reviewed the plea agreement one final time before addressing the former officer. "Mr. Paulson," Judge Ramirez began, deliberately not using his former title, "you've pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal felony. Before I accept this plea, I want to ensure you understand what you're admitting to." Paulson's attorney, a public defender named Robert Chen, who'd drawn the short straw on this case, nodded for his client to respond. "Yes, Your Honor," Paulson said quietly. "I understand. Do you admit that on March 15, 2024, you assaulted Marcus Thompson without legal justification? That you arrested him without probable cause? That you violated his constitutional rights based on racial prejudice?" Each question felt like a hammer blow. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Ramirez leaned forward. "Mr. Paulson, I've reviewed your case file extensively. I've read the victim impact statements from Gunnery Sergeant Thompson and 43 other individuals you victimized during your career. I've examined the statistical analysis showing your pattern of discriminatory enforcement. And I've watched the security footage of your assault on Gunnery Sergeant Thompson more times than I care to count." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "What I saw was a man who took an oath to protect and serve, and instead used his badge as a weapon against the very people he was supposed to protect. What I saw was systematic, intentional, and inexcusable abuse of power." In the gallery, Marcus Thompson sat in his Marine dress blues, recently promoted to first sergeant. Next to him sat his mother, Dr. Evelyn Thompson, and his 8-year-old daughter Jasmine, who was finally old enough to understand what her father had been through. "The plea agreement calls for 36 months in federal prison," Judge Ramirez continued. "However, I'm within my rights to reject this agreement and impose a harsher sentence. Mr. Paulson, give me one reason why I shouldn't." Paulson stood, his hands shaking. For 6 months, he'd been living in a nightmare of his own creation. His wife had left him. His friends had abandoned him. His pension was gone, seized to help pay the civil judgments against him. He'd lost everything. "Your Honor," he began, his voice cracking, "I can't give you a reason. What I did was wrong, not just to Gunnery Sergeant Thompson, but to everyone I hurt over the years. I told myself I was protecting my community, but the truth is, I was the threat." He turned to face Marcus directly. "First Sergeant Thompson, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to live with what I did to you and your family. I'm going to have to live with the knowledge that I became everything I claimed to stand against." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but he gave a single nod of acknowledgement. Judge Ramirez made her decision. "I'm accepting the plea agreement, but with modifications. 48 months in federal prison, not 36. 3 years of supervised release following incarceration. 500 hours of community service in predominantly minority communities. And you will be permanently barred from any law enforcement position in the United States." The gavel came down. Derek Paulson was led away in handcuffs, experiencing for the first time what so many of his victims had felt: the cold metal, the loss of freedom, the crushing weight of justice. But Paulson's sentencing was just one piece of a much larger transformation. The federal investigation into Millbrook County Sheriff's Department had uncovered a cesspool of corruption and discriminatory practices that went far beyond one officer. Sheriff Raymond Cunningham had resigned in disgrace, replaced by an interim sheriff appointed by the state governor, a species you, black woman named Tamara Williams, who'd spent 20 years with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Sheriff Williams stood in the department's main briefing room, addressing the remaining officers who'd survived the purge. 12 officers had been terminated. 4 faced criminal charges. The entire command structure had been dismantled and rebuilt. "Let me be crystal clear about something," Williams said, her voice carrying authority that came from competence, not cruelty. "This department failed. It failed Marcus Thompson. It failed the community. It failed every person of color who was victimized by officers who thought a badge gave them the right to be bullies." She pulled up a slide, showing new department policies. "We're implementing mandatory implicit bias, training for every officer every 6 months. We're installing body cameras that cannot be turned off or malfunction. We're creating a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. And we're establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct." One of the veteran officers, a man named Patron who'd worked with Paulson for years, raised his hand. "Sheriff, some of us are worried that these new policies will make it harder to do our jobs, that we'll be second-guessed on every decision." Williams fixed him with a steady gaze. "Officer Patterson, if your job involves discriminating against people based on their skin color, then yes, it will be harder. In fact, it will be impossible because you won't work here anymore. But if your job is protecting and serving all members of this community equally, these policies will make your job easier, not harder." She advanced to the next slide. "We're also implementing a new program called Community Bridge. Every officer will spend 4 hours per week working with community organizations, youth programs, and neighborhood associations, not as enforcement but as partners. You're going to learn the names of the people you serve. You're going to understand their lives, their challenges, their humanity." The changes weren't just happening in the sheriff's department. The Millbrook County Board of Commissioners had voted unanimously to establish a $5 million fund to compensate victims of police misconduct. Marcus Thompson had been awarded $1.2 million in his federal civil rights lawsuit. Money he immediately donated to establish a scholarship fund for children of military veterans in Millbrook County. At Miller's Diner, Betty Carson stood behind the counter, watching the morning news coverage of Paulson's sentencing. The diner had become something of a landmark in the months since the incident, the place where justice had begun its long, overdue arrival. Harold Becker sat at his usual booth, reading the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's front-page story, "From Breakfast to Federal Prison, How One Marine's Courage Exposed Systemic Racism." "Betty," Harold called out, "you seen this article?" "They quoted you." Betty walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. The article included her statement about watching Marcus Thompson get assaulted, about feeling helpless and scared, about wishing she'd done more. "I did what I could," Betty said quietly. "Testified at the trial. Told the truth even when Paulson tried to pressure me to lie." "You did good," Harold assured her. "We all should have done more over the years. All those times we saw Derek act that way and didn't speak up. We were part of the problem." The diner's door opened, and Marcus Thompson walked in, now in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He'd officially separated from the Marine Corps on April 15th as planned, and had accepted a position as Director of Veterans Services for Millbrook County. "First Sergeant Thompson," Betty's face lit up. She'd started calling him by his final rank, a mark of respect. "Your usual spot?" Marcus smiled. "Actually, Betty, I'm meeting some people here. We're starting a new program. Over the next 30 minutes, a diverse group filed into Miller's Diner. Veterans from different branches of service, different wars, different backgrounds. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, all united by their service to their country." Marcus stood at the front of the group. "Thank you all for coming. 6 months ago, I was arrested in this diner for the crime of eating breakfast while black. Today, we're launching the Millbrook Veterans Alliance, an organization dedicated to supporting veterans in our community, and ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. He gestured to the group. We're going to work with local law enforcement on training. We're going to mentor young people. We're going to be visible in our community, showing that veterans come in all colors, all backgrounds, all experiences. And we're going to hold everyone, including ourselves, accountable for treating all people with dignity and respect. The group applauded, and Betty Carson wiped tears from her eyes. In Atlanta, the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council had implemented new statewide policies based on the Millbrook case. Every police academy in Georgia now included comprehensive training on constitutional rights, implicit bias, and de-escalation techniques. The Millbrook case had become a cautionary tale taught to every new recruit. Attorney Jennifer Walsh had used her success in the Thompson case to launch a civil rights practice focused specifically on police misconduct. She'd already taken on 15 new cases, each involving officers who thought their badges placed them above the law. Major Ronald Foster had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and now oversaw the Marine Corps liaison program with civilian law enforcement agencies across the southeastern United States. His first major initiative was a partnership program that brought Marines and police officers together for joint training on leadership, ethics, and community service. Dr. Evelyn Thompson had come out of retirement to teach a class at the University of Georgia's School of Law. Military justice and civil rights, lessons from the Millbrook case. Her classroom was always packed, filled with future attorneys who wanted to fight the same fights she'd fought for 3 decades. But perhaps the most important changes were happening in the quieter spaces, the conversations between parents and children, the discussions in church basements and community centers, the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust. Marcus Thompson sat on his daughter Jasmine's bed, tucking her in for the night. She'd been struggling with nightmares since the arrest, fear that police officers would take her daddy away again. "Dad," she said quietly, "why did that police officer hurt you?" Marcus had known this question was coming. He'd been preparing for it, trying to find words that would explain without traumatizing, that would teach without instilling fear. Baby girl. Sometimes people make bad choices based on fear or prejudice. Officer Paulson saw me and made assumptions about who I was without knowing anything about me. He let his prejudices control his actions instead of doing his job correctly. But you're a good person. You're a hero. Marcus smiled, touching his daughter's cheek gently. "I'm just a person who tried to do the right thing. And that's what I want you to remember. When you see injustice, when you see someone being treated unfairly, I want you to speak up. Not with violence or anger, but with courage and truth, like you did, like I did. And like Betty and Harold did when they testified, even though they were scared. Like Sheriff Williams is doing now, by making changes. Like all the people who are working to make things better." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. "Dad, are you still mad at Officer Paulson?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I'm not mad, honey. I'm sad that he made those choices. I'm sad for all the people he hurt. But I'm also hopeful because look at all the good that's come from standing up to him. Look at all the changes happening in our community. So something good came from something bad? Something good came from people choosing to do the right thing, even when it was hard. That's the lesson I want you to learn. The story of Marcus Thompson and Derek Paulson became more than just a local news story. It became a case study in criminal justice reform textbooks. It became a training video for police departments. It became a viral social media movement with the hashtag #GBreakfastWhileBlack that sparked conversations about racial profiling across the country. But more importantly, it became a reminder that justice delayed is not justice denied when people have the courage to stand up and demand accountability. 1 year after that March morning, Miller's Diner held a community breakfast. Sheriff Williams sat with Marcus Thompson. Betty Carson served them both with a smile. Harold Becker raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To justice," he said simply. To justice, they echoed, and in a federal prison 300 miles away, Derek Paulson sat in his cell, thinking about the man he'd assaulted for eating breakfast, the career he'd destroyed through his own prejudice, and the countless victims whose lives he'd damaged because he thought his badge made him untouchable. He'd learned, far too late, that everyone, including police officers, especially police officers, is accountable to the law. Marcus Thompson had taught him that lesson, and it was a lesson Millbrook County would never forget. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.